Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the fog, your shoes clicking against uneven cobblestones as the gas lamps sputter overhead, casting just enough glow to see the outlines of horse-drawn carriages clattering by. That's right, you've officially stepped into Victorian England, where everything looks charmingly quaint on the outside, but the social rules could strangle you tighter than a corset laced by your nosy aunt. You probably wouldn't survive this dating scene, unless you're a fan of awkward small talk, rigid hierarchies, and the constant suspicion of being judged every time you breathe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, comment with where you're watching from and what time of day it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air smells faintly of coal smoke, a reminder that factories belch just around the corner, while fancy carriages roll by towards stately townhouses decorated with Gothic flair. You find yourself crossing a street where newspaper boys are hawking the latest scandal. Already you realise this is not just a different century, it's a different entire playbook for romance. Forget swiping right. Here, dating depends on class standing, reputation, and the elaborate ritual of courtship. Even calling it dating would make a prim Victorian faint on the spot. You tug your coat tighter, imagining yourself as a young man in 1860, pockets jangling with coins, but also with nerves. You can't just stroll up and say hello to someone attractive. No, every interaction is carefully supervised, almost like you're auditioning for a society play. And if you're a young woman, your every step echoes under the gaze of parents, neighbours, and even servants, each silently tabulating your marriage prospects as if they're betting on horses. Historians still argue whether the sheer intensity of this scrutiny strengthened marital bonds or shattered them under pressure. Either way, your choices are slim. Stick rigidly to the unwritten rules, or risk your social reputation. Basically, the 1800s version of losing all your followers overnight. The mainstream fact is this: marriage was essentially the goal of all courtships, not romance as we expect it today. A date wasn't about getting to know you in a casual sense. It was a high-stakes step toward securing your financial and social future. Meanwhile, the quirky tidbit is that in some regions, young folk testing compatibility weren't above tossing apple peels over their shoulders to see the letter shape of their future spouse's initials. Imagine meeting someone and thinking, I like their apple peel initials, so we're probably soulmates. Very scientific. You glance up and notice how this world requires even the streets themselves to be theatres of performance. A stroll is never just a stroll. A gentleman might happen to cross paths with a lady, bow respectfully, and exchange the most microscopic of nods. That could be the spark, but beware, too much visible enthusiasm, and you've just written tomorrow's gossip column. And don't even think about lingering unchaperoned on a bench. There's more surveillance here than in any modern CCTV system. Only instead of cameras, you have nosy relatives, judgmental neighbours, and the occasional stern policeman whose moustache means business. A horse's clop on, and as the fog thickens, you start to feel how lonely this formulaic atmosphere could be. Unlike our era of trial and error dating, most Victorian young adults met relatively few eligible partners outside their tight social sphere. The divide between classes was enormous. A middle-class daughter might spend her days embroidering and attending small family gatherings, while workers in the factories or servants in the kitchen worried less about calling cards and more about stomachs growling between shifts. Scholars still debate whether the strict codes of courtship provided necessary stability or just repressed human connection under layers of etiquette. You hear laughter spilling from a drawing room window as a family hosts a small at-home gathering. The piano notes drift into the street, mingling with the coach wheels and the hiss of a lantern. Inside that room, couples give hesitant glances from across the rug, shielded by the thrum of conversation. Out here in the mist, you can only imagine the nervous palms hidden inside gloves and the quickened breathing under high collars. The whole city feels like it throbs with stories, some filled with long, steady waits for love, others dashed in a single scandalous whisper. And of course, humour finds its place here too. Consider the young suitor terrified of calling on a lady, only to be told by her father that he must leave his shoes at the door. Possibly an entire social rejection masked as an insistence on carpet cleanliness. Or picture the teenager who drops his hat in front of a love interest, panics, and accidentally bows to the family dog instead. It happened. People in diaries complained about social faux pas constantly. Victorian dating was nerve-wracking enough without your Labrador upstaging your moment. The night winds tease the edges of your coat as you picture the pressures building. Parents expect you to marry well. Peers gossip when you lag behind. And society at large acts like your future depends entirely on staying polished, polite, and proper. Even so, in this rigid maze, hearts still skip and glance when eyes lock. That tension, the cage of etiquette holding back wild human sparks, will follow you down every fog-drenched street we explore tonight. You're still pacing through those gaslit streets, but soon your attention is yanked toward a crisp snap, the sound of a visiting card being laid delicately onto a silver tray. Ah yes, welcome to the microcurrency of Victorian affection, the calling card. With dimensions no bigger than a business card today, these slips of paper were less about names and more about social strategy. Like playing a constant round of Pokemon, but with paper rectangles that might decide your entire romantic future. You imagine yourself clutching a little stack close to your chest. Your handwriting must be flawless. The copperplate script judged as if it reveals your soul, your breeding, and whether your wrist has enough elegance to endure endless letter writing once married. The ritual goes like this. A suitor approaches the home of his intended. There, the lady's parents examine it, their eyebrows twitching with nuanced judgments about class, spelling, inequality, and sometimes even scent. Your destiny may hinge on one rectangle of cardstock. Historians still argue whether these cards were truly meaningful signals of romance, or just bureaucratic props in the enormous paperwork system that was Victorian society. the mainstream fact here. Calling cards weren't optional quirks. They were outright mandatory. No reputable introduction occurred without one, especially in the middle and upper classes. Forget to send your card after meeting someone, and it's social ghosting Victorian style. The quirky tidbit: some daring young people doodled tiny secret symbols on cards, like a barely noticeable heart or a folded corner, smuggling emotion past stern parents. Picture a girl spotting a faint crease on the card meant only for her eyes. A Victorian wink emoji slipped past her father's monocle. But oh, the dangers! Imagine you're a clumsy fellow and misplace your calling cards, only to present one stained with yesterday's lunch grease. That, and this is delightfully true, could effectively torpedo your social reputation. Scrap the romance. You'll forever be marked as the fellow who made mutton stew smears on Aunt Agatha's hallway tray. More humorously, some people collected the cards like crazy baseball enthusiasts, flipping through friends, names, and comparing fonts. Social life was, in part, a grand swap meet of personalized rectangles. The bigger tension in this zone isn't whether you hand one over, but whether that card is returned. Picture the heart-shaking sound of footsteps returning from the drawing room. If your card comes back untouched, with no at-home day written on it, that's a quiet but brutal rejection. No long text messages of explanation, no melodramatic phone calls, just silence, captured in stiff cardboard. You pause and let that weight rest on your shoulder. The heartbreak of rejection fits in the palm of your hand. You step into oneself further. Tonight, imagine being that young woman upstairs, deciding whether to receive the guest who presented his card. She knows every move may bind her reputation. Even a single invitation misstep could ignite gossip. She listens for her parents' whispered debate, because, though technically about her life, she doesn't quite get to make the call. The family name, the connections, the dowry, all filter through the tiny portal of that card. Historians still argue whether Victorian women demonstrated subtle power in these choices, or if families' grip was so tight their independence was mere illusion. And then something happens you dread. You're holding the tray when two cards slip side by side, suitors arriving at near the same time. Imagine the level of sweaty awkwardness when Mr. Polished Boots and Mr. Shaky Hands both find themselves waiting in the same hallway, eyes narrowing in duel, while the butler wonders if they should pull out dueling pistols or just stand politely until someone coughs. Romantic movies never truly capture this. Sometimes the hallway showdown meant one gentleman leaving crestfallen, outplayed before the relationship even started. Let's not forget humour. The Victorians themselves cracked jokes. One magazine published cartoons where gentlemen sent absurdly giant calling cards, the size of whole placemats, just to be noticed. When your potential spouse is determined by how much real estate you can command on cardstock, you know you're in a tricky age. But you can't ignore the tenderness woven among the rigidity. Consider someone saving a calling card for decades, treasuring it long after marriages, wars, and children. What begins as a perfunctory ritual becomes a relic glowing with personal meaning. Relationships often start small and paper thin, and then, if nurtured, expand into entire lives intertwined. The calling card was paradoxical, both cold bureaucracy and secret vessel of hope. Just like modern digital notifications, it could thrill or devastate with insane efficiency. You envision walking past a stationery shop, where samples of calling cards shine behind glass. Cursive gold letters, elaborate borders, swirling monograms. While you think about how we fuss over Instagram aesthetics today, you recognize the same pattern. Every generation finds a way to curate its identity. And here, in this fog-shrouded world, you realize each 9 by 6 centimeter card is the hinge upon which whole futures swing. As you continue drifting down the cobbles, clutching your fragile paper fate, you can't help but smile darkly. In a world of telegrams, manners, and whispered norms, love begins not with fireworks or bold declarations, but with dead silence on cardboard, waiting for an answer that may or may not come. And really, facing that silence is scarier than texting someone, "Hey," and seeing your message left on read. At least, nobody in the Victorian age could screenshot the rejection. You keep winding down that foggy street, the calling card still sweating gently in your palm. And now you feel the pressure of eyes. Not just any eyes, but relatives. Chaperones hover like dedicated Wi-Fi, never going offline, reminding you that Victorian love was a group project, whether you wanted it or not. You thought sneaking away for a flirtatious stroll might be simple? Wrong. Take a wrong turn without supervision, and the rumour mill spins into overdrive faster than you can say Downton drama. Imagine sitting in a parlour with someone who makes your stomach flip like a pancake. And right there in the corner sits your aunt, the ultimate mood dampener, pretending to embroider while actually observing every blink you take. The mainstream historical fact, chaperonage wasn't just suggested, it was socially compulsory for unmarried women of respectable families. The only safe environment for interaction was under the presence of elders, siblings, or officially trustworthy relatives. Except, here's the quirky tidbit. Some women hired professional chaperones, almost like romance bodyguards, who could be bribed with treats or distracted long enough for sly whispers to sneak through. And oh, the creativity that grew out of this repression. You flex your imagination. A folded curtain in the drawing room becomes a shield for stolen words. Couples discovered how to time comments so that while the piano boomed, tiny whispers could pass undetected. That sweet melody wasn't just entertainment, it was both cover soundtrack and co-conspirator. Historians still argue whether all these constraints sharpened the thrill of romance, making every stolen glance electric, or simply trapped young people in a cage of anxiety, discouraging genuine intimacy. ... You picture your own nerves climbing inside you, palms damp against gloves, while a chaperone clears her throat every time you lean 1 millimeter closer. It's almost comic, isn't it? A young man might attempt to hand a flower discreetly. The chaperone's hawk eyes spot the move before the stem even leaves his pocket. The poor girl coughs nervously, deciding whether to risk wrath or let the gesture wilt somewhere between them, Yet, despite heavy monitoring, subtlety found its glorious expressions. Couples invented coded ways to sneak words through looks, silence, and minuscule props. Gloves became their Morse code. A lady might drop one deliberately, allowing her admirer to pick it up and return it with a squeeze that lasted half a second too long. You, standing there watching, feel your heart hammer. Because in a world where chaperones dominate the space, a 1-second squeeze counts as scandalous ecstasy. Not everyone was equally monitored. Lower classes already working in shops and factories enjoyed slightly less intense surveillance. Their reputation still mattered. It's just easier to flirt when space isn't owned by drawing room sofas and lace-draped madres whispering criticism. Some male office clerks even bragged about sneaking penny strolls with shopgirls, catching precious time unseen. Of course, not every attempt worked, and plenty ended abruptly when an uncle or minister spotted the outing. Cue the awkward conversation worthy of a sitcom. Here's your comic interlude. One diary imagines a chaperone falling asleep mid-supervision, only for the two young lovers to panic. Should they use this rare moment to talk honestly? Instead, one accidentally kicked over a tea tray in the excitement, waking the chaperone immediately. Romantic momentum? 0. Broken china? 5 pieces. You can't help laughing. Sometimes opportunity sabotages itself. As you think deeper, you realize human ingenuity thrives under barriers. In Victorian times, restrictions forced lovers to innovate, to sharpen subtle communication. Romantic energy often channeled itself through music, poetry, or exaggerated politeness. Think of it as training for the Olympics of restraint, sprinting through micro opportunities in formal outfits that weighed more than your gym bag. Scholars still debate whether this practice built resiliency into romance, or whether those suppressed emotions later exploded in private dramas, diaries full of lamentations, and clandestine scandals. Picture your surroundings now. You walk past freshly printed etiquette guides in a shop window. Their rules printed in neat black letters. They instruct families exactly how long a call may last, what topics are appropriate, how many glances equal impropriety. Strictness is measured down to minutes and inches, as though love could be programmed like clockwork. Yet behind curtains, entire storms of feeling lived. So you, the silent traveller, look back at the parlour where a young woman's fan flutters with suspicious intensity. Is she? A truth sets in as you continue walking. Every generation figures out how to sidestep authority, whether it's sneaking texts under the dinner table or whispering behind heavy curtains. And Victorian lovers, locked inside their lace-covered social cage, mastered the art of tiny rebellions. It took only a glance, a whispered phrase under the piano's swell, and a chaperone's fleeting distraction to make entire hearts spin. And guess what? In moments like these, it feels more thrilling because of the risk. Restrictions sometimes make a single smile feel priceless. You can almost measure its weight in heartbeats. As you drift forward into the growing night, the laughter, supervision, and secret signals echo after you. A reminder that romance thrives not only in freedom, but also, strangely enough, under the tight grip of rules that almost dare you to find a loophole. You step deeper into the haze, drawn now into the golden glow of a parlour window, where candlesticks flicker and piano keys stumble over a hesitant melody. You slip quietly inside, and suddenly you're in the heart of Victorian courtship theatre. This is where the magic, or at least the heavily scripted, velvet-draped attempts at magic, happen. Forget steamy dates at cafes or midnight movies. Here, your romance outing involves being seated stiffly on embroidered chairs, sipping tea so hot you burn your tongue and pretending not to notice, while your every phrase is measured like ingredients in a fragile glass vial. Picture yourself perched nervously on the edge of a horsehair sofa, smoothing out your waistcoat, praying silently that you don't spill crumbs or trip over your own tongue. The mainstream historical fact: parlours served as the primary arena for courtship among respectable families. A family's drawing room became the audition hall, and with parents hovering like overzealous stage directors, your performance had to be flawless. Is your laugh polite? Are your compliments sufficiently restrained? Do your boots offend the carpet? Every detail sings louder than Cupid himself. And yet, in this oh-so-decorous environment, flirtation still flickers. Tea isn't just tea, it's an obstacle course. Handing a porcelain cup could allow fingers to graze. Passing sugar tongs might conceal a brief brush of contact. You discover that eye contact alone is practically the equivalent of a modern kiss. A young lady at the piano glides her hands over ivory keys, playing careful etudes. You, listening, pretend it's just music, but really, you wonder, was her chosen piece a coded message? Music itself whispers what she cannot speak. Historians still argue whether these musical displays were meant as genuine art, as testaments of character, or sneaky ways to communicate feelings in a language parents couldn't quite censor. Then comes the quirky tidbit, the infamous piano side shadowing. Young men often positioned themselves just so, leaning by the instrument's curve with arms crossed, feigning casual commentary on pitches, while desperately trying to send "notice me" vibes. Some even brought sheet music gifts, chosen not for artistry but for lyrical meanings, like slipping a mixtape across the table, Victorian edition style. Every parlour conversation lived under invisible pressure, an atmosphere so tight it could make you sweat through starched collars. And humour didn't escape, even here. Imagine a flustered young man reaching for his teacup, missing entirely, and knocking pastries onto the lap of his prospective bride's father. The diary entry that night probably ruined everything forever. Doomed. Send help. Or consider a granny loudly declaring from the corner, "He's got a weak chin, but perhaps strong morals." A statement so blunt it would make anyone choke on their scone. These moments remind you, no matter how stiff the etiquette, humans cannot resist comic mishaps. But beyond the laughter, your heart feels the ache of sincerity. Sitting in this glowing parlour, you sense how desperately these youths long to know each other beyond rehearsed politeness. They long to break free from polite chatter about opera tickets and weather reports. They want to talk about dreams, hopes, fears. Yet every word risks crossing limits. You lean into the hush, absorbing how each silence carries weight, how every gesture is pre-calculated like a chess move, and how raw authenticity is sometimes glimpsed only in fleeting moments between words. Think about the parlour itself. Heavy drapes, patterned rugs, family portraits glaring from gilt frames. The space is thick with heritage, reminding each suitor that this isn't a casual sofa. This is the very stage upon which the future is negotiated. A gentleman entering must compliment the decor, accept whatever tea is offered, and maintain posture stiff enough to impress royalty, yet relaxed enough not to seem robotic. What a performance! And unlike modern first dates, you can't fake a phone call to escape early. Once seated, you're trapped until ritual decides it's time to leave. And yet, sparks still fly. A lady pouring tea adjusts her grip just so, her sleeve brushing your knuckles as your hands meet with practiced innocence. A shared laugh over a silly slip of music feels intoxicating. Not because it's laugh out loud hilarious, but because it pierces the formality like a sunbeam through smog. At that moment, you glimpse what people fought so hard to find. Connection hidden beneath tradition's weight. Historians still debate whether this formality strengthened compatibility by forcing individuals to observe each other carefully, or whether it buried genuine character beneath a mask of manners. Was this slow dance of etiquette a sieve filtering the dedicated from the unserious, or a suffocating ceremony that crushed spontaneity flat? That question lingers like the piano note fading into silence after the young lady finally rises with a graceful bow. Outside, you breathe the cool air again, yet the warmth of that parlour lingers on your skin. You know you've just witnessed both the cage and the secret excitement of Victorian dating, where love hid in porcelain clinks and polite applause. The parlour was no ordinary room. It was stage, script, barrier and bridge. And in its flickering candles, you've seen how romance somehow found oxygen, even in tightly buttoned collars and heavily upholstered chairs. And in case you're wondering, yes, occasionally someone actually did faint from heat, nerves, or corsets. Nothing like collapsing onto the rug mid-Beethoven to make a lasting impression. Maybe not the impression you planned, but hey, memorable is memorable. You step out of the stately parlour, cheeks still warm from second-hand embarrassment, after witnessing yet another suitor nearly drown in his teacup. The night air greets you again, crisp and laced with coal smoke, and this time you notice details you might have missed before. The flutter of a fan in a young lady's hand, the gloved fingers tapping restlessly on the edge of a carriage door, the gleam of a parasol tilting slightly toward or away from a man in top hat and tails. This is not idle fidgeting. No, here you are thrust directly into the dazzling secret world of coded fashion flirtation, where accessories became telegraphs of the heart. The mainstream historical fact: Victorians, bound by layers of etiquette, used ordinary objects like gloves, fans, and parasols as tools for communication. Since direct romantic expression risked scandal, lovers deployed subtle body language assisted by props. A raised fan could mean, "I want to speak to you, Dad." A parasol held at a sharp angle meant not interested. Those gloves you tugged nervously, a pair could become secret letters, adjusted or dropped strategically to suggest favour or indifference. Then comes the quirky tidbit. There were even handbooks circulating for the so-called language of the fan. Picture it like a 19th century cheat sheet for emojis. For example, fanning fast might scream, "I am single," while fanning slowly whispered, "I am engaged." Of course, scholars still argue whether most people honestly memorized and respected this intricate code, or whether it was more the stuff of playful magazines and jokes than practical reality. Was it real romance Morse code? Or just a fashionable cultural meme of the Victorian day? The debate continues. You picture a summer promenade, ladies in pastel gowns, strolling with lace parasols, twirling like floral satellites. A suitor hovers nearby, desperate to crack the meaning of each motion. Did she just tilt the parasol to shade her left shoulder as an affectionate sign? Or simply because the sun was, in fact, in her eyes? Imagine the comedy here. You lean closer, eyes full of hope, while she's basically muttering internally about sunburn prevention. Somewhere, another suitor dramatically writes in his diary, "Her fan stroke tonight confirmed her devotion," when in reality, she was swatting at a fly. Gloves, meanwhile, served double duty. In high society, properly fitted gloves marked refinement. But that didn't stop cheeky lovers from engineering tiny tactile rebellions. Returning a glove with deliberate slowness, or stretching one across the palm before offering it back, could carry mountains worth of insinuation. If a hand once brushed your gloved fingers, that was practically the equivalent of fireworks exploding, whispered gasps, and a tabloid headline rolled into one. Keep in mind though, a sneeze at the wrong time could send a glove flying into the fireplace. Happens once and you're remembered forever as the smouldering glove suitor. Even fashion itself acted like a Greek chorus, commenting on love affairs. That ribbon pinned in her hair? Possibly chosen to echo the colour of his cravat, a subtle nod recognizable only if you paid excruciating attention. The fan, of course, became an extension of flirtation choreography, hiding a giggle, shielding an expression. Think of it like carrying a battery-powered neon sign, except it's lace. And your parents mustn't know what it says. Now imagine yourself at a garden party. The hedges rustle faintly, champagne glasses clink, and around you, parasols tilt like semaphore signals of desire. Your heart races. You look toward the fan flickering in her hand. Oh no, is that follow me or go away? The anxiety gnaws, but also excites. Restriction breeds obsession. One misplaced signal could start or end everything. This was the thrill of accessories doing double duty. Props turned sacred scripts, fashion now flirting. Humour naturally seeped in. One story tells of a genius fumble where a young man planned to announce his admiration during a waltz. He read her fan signals as green light and boldly declared his love, only to learn she was literally swatting at mosquitoes. He limped socially for the rest of the season, making eye contact only with the dance floor. Miscommunication was so common that friends joked about needing an interpreter. "Ah yes, I speak fluent fanese." Walking on through lamplit avenues, you feel the electric tension pulsing in every accessory. Gloves and fans flicker secretly like sparks from tinder. Yet you also recognize how fragile these symbols could be. A suitor could misread a flick of lace and either cement his dreams or doom them. Historians still debate to what degree these micro-rituals genuinely governed outcomes, or whether people simply mythologized them later. But whether or not the language of the fan was reliable code, the mere belief in it made ordinary gestures feel like loaded supernatural acts. You appreciate, maybe even envy, the intensity of meaning poured into such small signals. In your time, 3 dots typing on a phone give you palpitations. In their time, a lace fan's sweep made hearts pound with the force of destiny. Different props, same emotional roller coaster. By the time you leave that garden party in your imagination, you've seen how clothing and fashion transformed into love's secret alphabet. Flirtation didn't require words. It thrived in folds of fabric, swishes of silk, and a gloved hand shyly returning to its lap. For Victorians, accessories were not extras. They were the vocabulary of longing. And even when someone completely botched the translation, at least you could laugh about it later. In your diary, with multiple exclamation points, you leave the swish of parasols and the secret semaphore of fans behind. And now, the night's fog clears just enough to reveal the blunt, heavy truth lurking in every Victorian conversation. Love was never only about fluttering hearts or poetic glances. It was just as much about who had money, what family name adorned the parish ledger, and whether your blood was sufficiently well-bred. In short, welcome to the pragmatic core of Victorian dating. Class, cash, and compatibility. You picture yourself standing at a crossroads, one path paved with satin carriages and townhouses, the other with soot-covered cobbles and tenement windows stacked like worn library books. The mainstream historical fact: for most Victorians, marriage was an alliance of status, wealth, and social stability, not a free-floating exercise in personal chemistry. A wealthy merchant's daughter was expected to marry upward, or at least horizontally in class. Love, though sometimes present, often had to shuffle secondary to bank accounts and social pedigrees. And here's a quirky tidbit that paints the era vividly. Newspaper advertisements for matrimonial prospects actually flourished. In some publications, you'd find classifieds that sounded eerily like Tinder bios, minus the emojis. Gentleman, 24, robust health, seeks young lady with amiable temper and moderate fortune. Now, imagine swiping through Victorian ink on broadsheets, trying not to laugh over the sheer bluntness. Good dowry essential. Not exactly poetry, but incredibly practical. Historians still argue whether this mercenary approach destroyed sincere romantic love, or whether it provided couples a firm base of security that later allowed intimacy to grow. You ponder silently. Is it really better to fall for someone spontaneously, but struggle economically? Or to launch life with a solid foundation and wait for affection to blossom? The Victorians certainly leaned toward the latter, though not without protests in novels and whispered defiance at family dinners. You march onward, boots crunching through your imagined street. A row of elegant houses faces a tangle of smoky factories in the distance. The perfect metaphor for different markets of love. A clerk in the city might worry constantly whether his meagre salary could support a family in comfortable style. A rural girl with barely a dowry might hold on to the slim hope of marrying for affection, only to be pressed instead toward improving her lot by catching whatever slightly more stable partner appeared. Seen this way, romance starts to look more like accountancy with lace. Yet inside all this pragmatic calculus, human beings still throbbed with longing. A young woman reading Byron secretly by candlelight might fantasize about true passion, even as her parents arranged tea with a wealthy but humorless landowner. You can almost hear the sighs pressed into diaries. Today I was admired by Mr. So-and-so, but my heart was unmoved. No emojis required. You know the sound of despair when you hear it. And then there's the ultimate stress test, dowries. Marriages often hinged on how much property or money a bride's family could supply. It leads to unintentionally comic tragedies. One story tells of a suitor who courted passionately, only to discover the dowry wasn't forthcoming. His ardour cooled faster than tea left unattended, and suddenly he was called away on urgent business indefinitely. You don't need to be a cynic to recognise that urgent business meant realised she has no property. Sometimes the shuffle inverted. Historian gossip suggests gentlemen with dwindling fortunes scoured for wealthy wives. The so-called fortune hunters. Entire novels lampooned them. A young man swaggering through a drawing room, claiming vast ambitions, all while calculating how much cash her father possessed. The joke of the age was, he fell in love with her income. And yet for poorer men, it was survival. Imagine gambling your entire livelihood on winning affection from someone who saw through your act. No pressure at all. Compatibility mattered beyond wealth too. Religious alignment loomed. Protestants worried about Catholics. Anglicans weighed Methodists. Jews faced prejudice about marrying across faiths. Families assessed reputations like auditors, fretting about possible scandals. And in a society obsessed with good breeding, even distant family misadventures could sink a proposal faster than a ship meeting an iceberg. And yes, Victorians, absolutely obsessed over naval metaphors. The comic relief here almost writes itself. Picture a dinner where the well-heeled suitor arrives, praised for his impeccable inheritance, only to gnash his teeth on overcooked beef and declare loudly, "This meat is an insult!" Suddenly, his social stock plummets. Or the reverse, a young woman so desperate to show off her refinement that she peppers her conversation with random French words she barely understands. The weather, is très drizzle. Laughter muffled. Reputations shattered. The fact that wealth mattered didn't mean social grace didn't carry equal weight. And still, the romantic dream persisted. Even within arranged expectations, hearts sometimes rebelled. Elopements occurred. Scandalous, messy, exhilarating. The press wasted no ink in tattling on such rebellious unions. Victorians craved gossip, the way we scroll today. Imagine the thrill of reading. Daughter of wealthy haberdasher eloped with penniless clerk. Some readers groaned at the impracticality. Others secretly cheered for love's scrappy persistence. As you walk on into the mist, this truth hardens in you. For Victorians, love was a tightrope between desire and duty, finances and feelings. Class stratification made crossing classes rare, though possible, and whether lovers obeyed family economics or rebelled against it, the consequences always rippled through parlours, papers, and whispered drawing room chatter. By now, fog curls at your boots, and the lamps glow with tired warmth. You recognize money and reputation framed love. Yet even under these heavy structures, hearts still leapt dangerously into mess. It was either system or scandal, dignity or disaster. And sometimes, in the best stories, it was both. Because apparently, romance loves a little chaos. Even when bank accounts and pedigrees loom like thunderclouds overhead. You trudge deeper into the gas-lit streets, coat collar turned up against the night mist, when suddenly the mood shifts. Your ears catch whispers sneaking round corners, like ripples of scandal carried on the fog. Because while the Victorians loved their rules and propriety, they also secretly adored breaking them, or at least hearing about others who did. Welcome to the shadow side of courtship. Scandal, secrets, and taboo tales that rattled drawing rooms from Bristol to Bath. The mainstream historical fact paints it clearly. Reputations during this period were so fragile that a single misstep, an unchaperoned walk, a letter intercepted, or a boarding house neighbour whispering too loudly, could dismantle an engagement and permanently tarnish your standing. A young woman delicately manoeuvring the social labyrinth might behave perfectly for years, only to endure downfall from one rumour in a column of a local gazette. But let's talk about the quirky tidbit, letter locking. Lovers often exchanged secret correspondence. But since letters might be read by meddlesome siblings or intercepted by suspicious parents, clever sweethearts invented elaborate folds and wax seal tricks designed to reveal tampering. Some folded in spirals that could only be unravelled one way, while others tied ribbons through slits in paper to discourage curious eyes. Think of it like the Victorian version of password protection, except your password is an origami puzzle made from stationery. Of course, scholars still argue whether these surreptitious love letters were as widespread as novels suggest, or whether the reality was far duller. Most people simply whispering in garden corners under watchful eyes. Either way, the fact remains. Scandal fueled the atmosphere far more than anyone wanted to admit. Romance in Victorian times was played on a razor's edge. Let's say you risked slipping a note under the parlour door. Now, imagine your carefully penned prose winding up in the wrong hands. Like the lady's stern father. Suddenly, you're banished from the house. Your calling cards refused. Your good name spattered like ink across the neighbourhood. Reputation wasn't just a nice thing to have. It was essentially your social currency. Lose it, and no one wanted to dance with you, let alone marry you. The gossip ecosystem magnified everything. Families whispered after church. Papers mocked social indiscretions. And cartoonists didn't hesitate to lampoon real scandals with obvious caricatures. You chuckle, because humans haven't changed that much. If social media today thrives on spilled drama, so too did the drawing rooms then. Though instead of TikTok dances, you had caricatures of ladies swooning in fainting chairs. And the scandals? They ranged from mischievous to catastrophic. A couple caught holding hands in a dimly lit conservatory might become the star gossip of a village for months. Slightly spicier, a young lady seen exchanging letters at the post office at odd hours. Catastrophic, full-blown elopements. These fueled newspapers the way celebrity weddings do in our time. Readers devoured every word about Miss X fleeing with coachman Y under cover of darkness. Yet there's comedy in the chaos, too. Imagine a young man planning a daring secret letter drop in the garden urn, only for the gardener to mistake it for scrap and light his morning pipe with it. Or the couple arranging a whispered tryst in the shrubbery during a party, only to sneeze from pollen and blow their cover instantly. There are accounts, half tragic, half hilarious, of lovers trying to sneak coded glances across the ballroom, only to find the wrong person meeting their eyes and interpreting it as a proposal. Victorian dating wasn't just fraught, it was slapstick at times. Still, heartbreak was real. The terror of scandal silenced many feelings outright. People lived under a microscope so relentless that confessions of love could feel like treason. Many diaries from the time bleed with entries like, "It cannot be spoken, for tongues are poisoned and walls have ears." That tension presses on your chest as you walk the cobbles tonight. How suffocating it must have been to long desperately for. Historians still debate whether Victorian society's obsession with scandal genuinely promoted moral restraint, deterring risky behaviours, or whether it simply drove indiscretions underground, fueling an endless cycle of gossip. What remains clear is that each scandal, whether true or exaggerated, formed the very lifeblood of social conversation. Dull evenings at home perked up when the doorbell rang with fresh whispers of elopement or indiscreet letters. So as you pause tonight on a damp street corner, you can almost hear the faint clink of whispered rumours passing from one gas lamp's glow to another. Within these secret tales, you sense the very human contradictions, condemning impropriety with one breath, while leaning in to hear more with the next. Scandal both terrified and exhilarated the Victorians, blurring the line between fear and fascination, propriety and longing. And if you think that sounds exhausting, you're right. Imagine surviving this world where a sneeze, a folded paper, or an innocent shadow in the conservatory could dictate the course of your entire future. Sleep tight with that thought, because in Victorian England, rumour was less like idle chatter and more like a social guillotine floating just above your lace collar. The night stretches on, and while the last whispers of scandal still echo behind you, your ears catch an entirely different sound now. Half earnest, half absurd. You hear lectures drifting from a crowded lecture hall, pamphlets rustling in the breeze, and the faintly ridiculous hum of eccentric scientists promising secrets of love and attraction. Step closer, and you stumble into one of the most bafflingly entertaining layers of Victorian dating. The era's obsession with science, pseudoscience, and any random theory that could explain or manipulate matters of the heart. The mainstream historical fact is clear. The 19th century was obsessed with systematizing human behavior. Phrenology, the science of reading personality based on skull shape, and physiognomy, guessing character from facial features, were wildly popular. A suitor might literally feel the bumps on his head examined to determine whether he was husband material. Imagine someone tapping your forehead and declaring, "Oh, large protrusion here. Excellent for marital fidelity." Comforting, right? In an age where compatibility seemed fragile, people were desperate for formulas that promised certainty. Enter the quirky tidbit. One pseudo-scientific practice suggested magnetism, literal invisible forces, guided attraction. Couples attended public demonstrations where men in capes waved magnets around volunteers, insisting that electrical currents between bodies explained love at first sight. Some enthusiasts even carried tiny magnetic charms, hoping to improve their charisma at dances. Picture a gentleman smoothing down his moustache, whispering, "Don't worry, dear, I brought my magnet tonight." If modern dating apps feel gimmicky, at least they don't ask you to carry iron filings to prove your passion. Scholars still argue whether these practices genuinely reassured daters or served mostly as entertainment, a mix of novelty shows and parlour gossip. Either way, they reveal the Victorian hunger to translate the unpredictable spark of affection into rules, charts, and mechanical certainty. You sense this insatiable craving. In a world bound by etiquette, they wanted not mystery, but algorithms, albeit ones etched in skull diagrams rather than on microchips. The pseudosciences weren't the only guides. Etiquette books flourished, unloading endless paragraphs of advice. How to smile, how many minutes to visit, what conversational topics revealed a fertile mind, what colours even signalled a morally clean personality. Some guides sternly declared, "Never discuss digestion at table," as though droves of nervous suitors were blurting out bowel details during tea. Reading them now, you laugh at their anxious micromanaging. But to Victorians, guidance felt vital in avoiding humiliating faux pas. You drift with the crowd into a bustling fairground demonstration. Barkers shout promises. Want to know your romantic destiny? Step right up. Let the phrenologist run his fingers over your head bumps. The room buzzes like a 19th century science expo, full of earnest faces, hoping skull shapes reveal their soulmates. You clap your hand on your own brow, silently relieved no one today demands cranial exams before coffee dates. Adding to the comic tapestry, one pamphlet enthusiastically explained how human breath odour was a sign of inner morality. Romantic advice quickly devolved into, "Do brush your teeth, for it signals virtue." Somewhere between genuine hygiene and pseudo-morality, people probably overcompensated by crunching cloves just to look noble. You picture someone choking on mouthwash herbs mid-proposal, muttering through tears, "It means I'm very virtuous." Against these laughable theories, you also noticed genuine curiosity. Victorians were sincerely grappling with new sciences. Darwin shook the theology. Electricity whispered of invisible forces, and psychology was just dawning. The decades brimmed with experimentation and uncertainty. In the courting context, new theories leaked into hearts desperate for reassurance. It's that eternal human quest. Can we decipher the mysteries of love? Or must we forever stumble through guessing? An anxious suitor might show up with a phrenology certificate touting generous, loyal, docile, as one today might flash a curated dating profile. Does it matter if the category is pseudoscientific? Perhaps not. Both are attempts at packaging desire into something legible. Historians still debate whether Victorians truly believed these bizarre methods, or whether they knowingly leaned into them as fashionable amusements disguised as science. Likely, reality lived in a blur. People half believing, half playing into popular trends. Just as we sometimes click horoscope websites for fun, and then secretly wonder if Mercury is indeed ruining our love lives. And underlying all the absurdity, you can't ignore a darker undertone. Pseudosciences also reinforced prejudices, using logic to justify class, racial and gender hierarchies. The same skull-measuring mania that promised romantic compatibility also excused cruel stereotypes. It's sobering to remember. What began as love guidance often tilted into exclusion and control. Back in the street, the fog swirls again. Somewhere nearby, an earnest young woman thumbs through an etiquette guide, memorizing the correct way to smile. Somewhere else, a hopeful man clutches a magnet charm, praying his aura impresses. Everywhere, laughter, superstition, and yearning ripple through the crowd. And tucked into your own coat, you feel grateful for all our modern foibles, for no longer needing to prove your head bumps line up before being allowed to hold someone's hand. Though, admit it, you're slightly bummed we don't have flirtation magnets anymore. At minimum, they would make speed dating more electrifying. The fog hasn't thinned, but as you stroll onward, the world around you brightens into patches of gaslamp glow, where laughter echoes more freely than in tightly drawn parlours. You've left behind chaperones and skull readers for a different kind of courtship arena. The lively streets, the green parks, the bustling dance halls, the public yet strangely private spaces where romance squeezed itself into stolen, semi-legitimate encounters. Victorian restraint meets humanity's refusal to be restrained, and sparks leap furtively in the open air. The mainstream historical fact, despite it was carefully scandal-proof, a loophole carved out by tradition. Technically public, yet still private enough for stolen words. Now, for the quirky tidbit. Skating rinks. Yes, Victorian Britons loved ice skating, especially when London's winters cooperated or when artificial rinks popped up. For couples, skating offered the perfect blend of visibility and intimacy. One slip on the ice, and suddenly you're holding gloved hands longer than etiquette allows. Imagine Victorian rom-com moments. A lady deliberately wobbling, accidentally leaning too close, while the gent pretends not to notice his pounding pulse. Professional historians still debate whether Victorians viewed such physical contact as innocent sport or dangerously flirtatious transgressions, barely disguised by the rink's jolly atmosphere. You picture yourself wandering Hyde Park on a bright spring morning. Carriages roll past, while fashionable ladies walk under parasols. Gentlefolk twirl their canes, and benches become silent theatres of coded gestures. A young man tips his hat just slightly. Does she notice? She adjusts her parasol angle. Does he interpret the signal right? Somewhere along Rotten Row, horse riders use their circuit laps as opportunities for flirtation. Each trot a clinic in posture, control, and concealed glances. Equestrian romance, Victorian edition. Ballrooms, meanwhile, pulsed with hidden electricity. Dancing wove couples together, under the righteous excuse of choreographed steps. Don't underestimate how daring contact felt. One gloved hand settling at a waist, eyes catching in a dizzy spin, bodies close enough to taste each other's perfume. All sanctioned beneath chandeliers. It was the Tinder swipe of its age, but with more sweat and less air conditioning. Yet here too, danger lurked. A suitor who misstepped or trod clumsily on a hem might sink his courtship faster than mistyping "You are great" in a love letter. Ballrooms were spectacular and merciless. Street fairs and seaside resorts offered more cheerful chaos. Imagine the laughter from Punch and Judy puppet shows, the scent of roasted chestnuts, and the sudden thrill when fortune tellers promised glimpses of marriage lines. A couple might conceal their conversation within louder bustle, enjoying a sliver of privacy hidden by noise. And here, away from drawing room scrutiny, you spot real humanity bursting through. Blushing cheeks, awkward stammers, genuine smiles untamed by etiquette manuals. Even stiff-collared Victorians weren't immune to the carnival's energy. Comic relief thrives in such places too. Picture a suitor finally gathering the courage to confess admiration during a promenade, only to have a goose waddle down the path and honk loudly enough to drown him out. Forever remembered as the lad upstaged by poultry, or envision dancers colliding mid-waltz with such force they knock desserts from the buffet table, creating an impromptu pudding avalanche. The dignified era had its bloopers reel, rest assured. Still, balance always tilted between possibility and peril. Imagine walking with someone across a municipal park. Voices mutter nearby. If the wrong neighbour sees, tongues wag for weeks. The irony is thick. The park is technically public, yet the social consequences are every bit as private and personal. Historians still argue whether public intercourse, social intercourse, I see that eyebrow raise, actually democratised courtship, allowing lower and middle classes freer mingling, or whether it simply extended elite rituals outdoors while maintaining the same surveillance in prettier settings. And let's not forget printed guidebooks wagging fingers at public behaviour. They sternly cautioned against undue eagerness during promenades. No loud joking, no ignoring of elders, certainly no touching. Yet among lovers, of course, that's precisely what made public spaces appealing. Public was cover. Amongst hundreds of bodies, a whispered "meet me tomorrow" could go easily unnoticed, like a single raindrop falling into a fountain. As you wander through this world, you realise how resourceful humans can be. A walk through a park, a glance across a ballroom, a ride along a bridle track. These weren't just diversions, they were strategies, backdoors into intimacy. Life's restrictions couldn't strangle entirely the creative hunger to connect. Lovers laced hope into every shuffle step, masquerade mask, and shared bench. And as night folds again around your imagined footsteps, you feel the jittering heartbeat of every Victorian who ever clutched their chest in secret joy while pretending only to admire the scenery. Public spaces buzzed with hidden love. Maybe even now, if you pause by a modern park bench, you can hear faint echoes, parasols tapping, gloves falling, and nervous laughter drowned by the carousel's tune. Because in the end, Victorian courtship flourished not just in suffocating parlours or whispered scandals, but also here, outside, in gardens and ballrooms, where real life flooded in and spun love stories that bent, stretched, crumbled, and soared with every step. The fog curls tighter now, thick as velvet curtains, and you feel yourself being ushered down the final stretch of this peculiar journey. Around you, the noise of public parks and laughter from ballrooms fades away, replaced by the quiet anticipation of something heavier, something decisive. For all the rituals, for all the calling cards and parlour teas, the goal of Victorian dating boiled down to this: the proposal and the promise it locked in. And my friend, no moment carried more pressure than this one. The mainstream historical fact is simple. Engagement wasn't merely a personal contract between two people. It was a formal social announcement merging finances, families, and reputations. Once the engagement was declared, both parties became publicly tethered, with entire communities watching. Breaking off a proposal wasn't just painful, it could have catastrophic ripples. The word fiancé was as weighty as iron. There was no casual, let's just see how this goes. And then, the quirky tidbit. Engagement rings with hidden compartments existed, often designed to carry a painted miniature portrait, a lock of hair, or even tiny texts of scripture. Imagine clasping hands and realizing the jewel you're admiring has a secret chamber brimming with sentimental hair. It's both touching and, let's be honest, a little creepy. Historians still argue whether these ornate little relics were common tokens of genuine devotion or flamboyant gimmicks used primarily by wealthier classes eager to show off sentimental bling. Proposals themselves came with elaborate etiquette. A gentleman had to win more than the lady's heart. He had to win her family's consent. Picture a suitor rehearsing his speech, tugging nervously at his cravat, while her father paces, measuring both his fortune and his fortitude. Love collided with ledgers, and emotion locked horns with expectation. For the young woman, saying yes or no wasn't simply a matter of desire, but of familial duty, financial future, and sometimes genuine survival. You can almost feel her heart beating hard through layers of lace, her mind spinning between what she wants and what she owes. Some proposals became spectacles, delivered during carefully planned family dinners, wrapped with polite applause and rapid consultations. Others, more secretly, erupted in private moments. A clasped hand at a garden gate, a soft kiss stolen in the moonlight, when the chaperone tripped briefly on her hem. Each route carried risk and thrill, a blend of joy and danger, like balancing a teacup on a galloping horse. And then, of course, there's comedy. One tale tells of an overzealous suitor rehearsing, ring awkwardly hidden in his boot. When nerves struck, he fumbled, dumped the ring under the table, and watched in horror as a dog bounded off with it. Imagine chasing a terrier mid-proposal. Dignity lost, romance mangled. But at least the story endured. Another rumour involved a bookish young man blurting, "Marry me," right as he sneezed, producing a proposal half drowned in handkerchief, half immortalised in diary ink. Awkward, yes. Unforgettable, absolutely. Yet once accepted, engagement became semi-sacred. Families exchanged formalities. Newspapers sometimes printed the news, and gifts circulated. Historians still debate whether these engagements always produced stronger marriages, or whether pressure cracked them in silence. Divorce was legally possible but socially toxic, so couples often soldiered on regardless. Still, you sense that many found happiness. Years of anxiety and surveillance yielding, eventually, to shared firesides, children's laughter, and the companionship of two humans who once dared to brush hands under the shadow of a fan. As the fog deepens into stillness, you realize this journey has carried you from stiff streets and nervous calling cards through parlor performances, accessory codes, scandals, fairgrounds, and finally here, beneath the heavy hush of engagement. What you've seen is a society trying desperately to cage love with rituals and reputations, yet time and again, love leaked through. In shy glances, coded gestures, nervous laughter, even accidental proposals stolen by dogs. Romance proved itself unkillable. And now, with the lanterns flickering low, it's time to leave the Victorians to their endings, their marriages, their obligations, and their occasional genuine joy. The lamps dim, carriages roll away, and the cobblestones finally quiet under a blanket of mist. The frantic pulse of chaperones, calling cards, and whispered scandals dissolves now into something slower, softer, like exhaling after holding your breath for far too long. You imagine walking past empty parlours where candles gutter low and roses from earlier teas droop gently in porcelain vases. The air is calm again, humming faintly with yesterday's laughter. But tonight invites silence. Let your shoulders loosen. Hear the gas lamps sputter as their flames withdraw into calm glows. All around, the Victorian world folds itself to sleep. Gloves are set aside. Fans are tucked into drawers. Parasols rest in stands by front doors. Everything that once carried secret meaning now relaxes, its codes resting, waiting for tomorrow's bustle. Perhaps you pause at the garden gate, where families once judged glances and suitors rehearsed trembling speeches. Tonight it holds only dew, each drop gleaming softly like fallen stars. Think of the countless stories that once converged here, gossip, scandals and triumphs, all now washed into silence, leaving only gentle shadows and memory. And as you stand there, you feel tenderness dawning. Despite the weight of rules and rituals, human beings still found connection, still dared to slip smiles into suffocating etiquette, still reached for hands behind rustling curtains. That is what endures, how love persists, adapting to every cage society builds. So breathe deeply, as though you're pulling cool night air through century-old lace curtains. Each breath softens you further. Each heartbeat slows into steady rhythm. With the fog settling, the streets empty, and the quiet of another age surrounding you, it feels safe now to close your eyes. Drift gently, trusting the warmth of forgotten parlours, the echo of soft glances, the everlasting hum of longing that threads one century into the next.